Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started or rolling any further, I just want to encourage you, please hop into the chat. Let us know if you can hear and see us all right. Today we have Christian and Eddy from WeAreNoCode. Very excited. Christian, Eddy, can you just give a little wave and a hello so people can make sure they can see and hear you all right?
Exactly.
Feel
Hello,
free.
hello.
Cheers. Feel free also to pop in the comments, say what you're excited to learn today, where you're tuning in from. We love to hear where people are coming from all over the world. Couple expectations: if these two move through any information too fast, or things are rolling, or you have to walk away from the computer for a second, don't worry. There will be a replay available for this event, both on the YouTube page, the Discover page, and it will be emailed to you with the course offer after the event, so do not fret. Also, these two here are here today to answer a lot of questions, so we will have a shorter presentation than some Q&A. Feel free to start dropping your questions in the chat as they come up. We're going to have a long time to address a lot of those. To give a formal introduction here, today we are with WeAreNoCode with Christian and Eddy. Something we can expect to learn today is basically, is no-code a good fit for your startup? Christian is a serial entrepreneur and digital strategist with over 12 years of experience building startups, running accelerators, and consulting for Fortune 500 companies and celebrities. And Eddy, tapping into his experience building products and MVPs, has mentored startups on topics like machine learning, agile product development, and no-code. I don't want to take up too much time here, gentlemen, so I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. So Eddy will be joining us in the Q&A, and we're going to be answering all your questions. Again, the aim of this presentation is not to give you a wall of information. It's more about really answering your questions. And the idea is that you're coming here, you're either an aspiring entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, or you're someone who's interested in building something. And so we want to kind of help you in doing so. So we're going to have a format that's a little bit more sort of interactive this time. I'll let Eddy say a couple words before he kind of jumps out.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, we lost Eddy there, Christian, for a second. So maybe why don't you hop into the presentation and we will make sure we get him back there.
Perfect, no problem. This is what's great about these, is that we don't have to be nervous. We can just keep going with the show, and then Eddy will be coming back. You'll be seeing him in just a couple minutes. So what I wanted to start off with was just a couple of words around NoCode, give you a sort of an introduction around me and Eddy, what we've done, and also talk to you a little bit about our program. So what you can see is the course section of our program right below or on the right or left. But I'll tell you a little bit more about what's in the program because it's a little bit more all-encompassing than that. So I'll start off with an introduction. I have founded 3 startups, raised seed capital for 2 of those, have had an exit. I am personally from Switzerland, kind of grew up all over the world. For 3 years, I was the director of a startup accelerator called Startup Boost LA. We trained over 100 startups who went on to raise more than $40 million, got into some of the top accelerator programs. And in that process, I basically got to see first-handedly a bunch of startups and really realized that there was a problem in the way that people were building startups. So we were going through about 400 applications every 6 months, would sort of run them through the program. And at the end of that program, they would be on stage at Google in front of about 100 investors. And that's when we would try to get them in the fundraising process or helping them figure out what the next step was for them. So it was a really fun process for me, but it really gave me the 2 sides, both being an entrepreneur and also being a trainer. This is Eddy. When I met him, my kind of life changed in terms of the way that I approached startups altogether. He was at the time the head of product and innovation for one of the largest independent agencies. So essentially helping building prototypes and products for some really big and well-known brands. And the thing that really struck me when I met him was to realize how little money he was spending to build out these products, between $100 and $1,000. And in many cases, I'd seen people spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in this direction. Essentially, when we met, he had actually built Sizely. So this is a platform that was built in 90 days for $1,000, and that was generating $12,000 in monthly recurring revenue. It really showed me, oh man, there's really just an exciting new way of building startups. And that's when we sort of got together and built WeAreNoCode with the ambition and mission to empower the next generation of non-technical founders, because we noticed that people who did not have coding skills were probably facing the worst problems out of anyone. So whether that be an entrepreneur or someone who is running their own business and is trying to build software internally. So that's when we realized, like, in this accelerator program, we're only able to train 8 to 10 startups every 6 months. What happens if we are able to find a way to democratize this information and all the learnings that we'd had through our sort of careers as entrepreneurs and product builders? So at this point, we've trained more than 350 startups around the world, more than 23 countries, and have some awesome partnerships with schools, with accelerator programs, as well as with nonprofits. We're quite active in the underrepresented communities, specifically in LA. And so today I wanted to jump into NoCode and tell you a little bit about that. Not too much, just enough so that there's a bit of context for those of you who I'm coming to cold with NoCode if you don't know what it is. It's essentially also called visual programming, and it's a set of tools that allows non-technical people or founders to build software without learning how to code. And you don't actually even need to understand coding language to be able to build software in this way. If we look at the evolution of programming, we get a bit more sort of context. So computers understand ones and zeros. We used to kind of deliver those ones and zeros with punch cards into these massive computers, probably the size of your house. And over time, there was a next evolution, which was programming languages. So as you know, sort of C++, Python, PHP, etc. Many languages which would essentially create an interface between us and computers to communicate ones and zeros. And what NoCode is visual programming. So essentially a set of tools or visual interfaces that allow you to build software without coding or understanding coding language again. I'll repeat myself a little bit to really hammer in the points here. I hope you don't mind. So if you can think of it kind of like building visually like you would do on PowerPoint, creating some of the logic and the user flows like you would use Excel. And essentially at this point, there are a set of tools that this movement started even before the year 2000, but we can think of some platforms that allow you to kind of build without code, like WordPress or Drupal. And then we kind of evolved to this next generation, which kind of 100% no code. So Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, and Weebly. Now, these are very templatized and in many cases not very flexible. You can only build things like e-commerce platforms or landing pages. And so when we talk about this movement, no code, it's really about this explosion of new tools that allow you to go way further and build much more complex software than previously possible. And so what that's doing is that it's empowering this entire new generation of founders, of entrepreneurs, and it is democratizing sort of entrepreneurship when we all know that every single opportunity requires some kind of a platform, some kind of technical skills, some kind of a build. And so the exciting thing is that it's now sort of available to a larger audience. Now, there are over 1,200 tools, and usually people get very lost within the tools and kind of try to figure out which platforms to build with. It can be very confusing and overwhelming. And there are sort of platforms that can allow you to do all sorts of things. We'll get a bit more into that in a second. But let's talk a bit more about how it works to kind of illustrate it more visually. This is how you would build sort of design within the old model, which is sort of building things with code. So everything's essentially you're writing out the code individually, and it is sort of controlling the design. With no-code platforms, here's one example, which is sort of Webflow. Here, you're actually visually building using drag and drop elements. You're not actually touching any of the code, but there's code behind everything that you're building. So it goes way further than just like a designer or like a clickable prototype. And that's what's really exciting for this movement. When we talk about creating the logic, again, everything is typed in HTML, in Python, JavaScript, Angular, etc. Now we're really talking about creating this logic in plain English. So if I click request a ride, it's going to create a new ride. It's going to send a notification to so it's really about sort of the logic that you want your functionalities to do, you can do that in plain English, and it makes it just much more accessible. So let's talk about some examples of platforms. Here is Webflow. This is one of the tools that we love at WeAreNoCode and teach as well as part of our curriculum. This is an interface called Adalo. Here, it's sort of, this is much more for sort of native mobile first apps. We also have an example which is bubble.io. So this sort of allows you to build pretty complex software. And we'll get a little bit more into these tools. I'm sure you have questions and have heard of a bunch of these platforms and probably want to ask them. So if you're in the chat right now, just type any one of your questions. You can literally tell us your idea and ask us how we think you might want to approach building it. So let's talk about some real world examples real quick. This is ClearSegment. We actually built this platform so we could teach the NoCode platforms that we use to build it to our within our curriculum. It's a SaaS platform, so software as a service, so a subscription model. You pay on a monthly basis. It was built in 10 days. We spent $40 to build it, and we built it using these tools. So Webflow, Airtable, MemberStack, and Zapier. Then we have Proofreader.ai. We built this, so this was built by Eddy. Sorry, when I say we built this, Eddy is doing a lot of the no coding, and I'm doing a lot of the other stuff around that. So this actually cost $500 to build in 21 days. This is a way to proofread sort of imagery. So think of it, you take a picture of something like a billboard, and it can essentially tell you if there's a typo in that, or a deck that you might be sending to a client. So the way this was built was with Webflow, Google Cloud Vision API, which is sort of tapping into existing technology for visual recognition that was already built by Google. We just sort of include that into the solution here. And also the language tool API, which allows us to identify sort of mistakes in the grammar or other things when it comes to proofreading. Then we have Sizely, talked about this a little earlier. So you kind of know a little bit about it. Cost $1,000, was built in 90 days, 35,000 users, $12,000 MRR. It is now way beyond that, but that was what it was at the time where me and Eddy had met. This is Clamly. So this is actually a cryptocurrency miner. Unfortunately, it had to be closed down because of the sort of changes in laws. You couldn't mine crypto within browsers anymore, but it cost $600 to build. In 14 days, had 200,000 monthly users and a total of $38,000 before it was closed. And so when we talk about building software, and when we talk about building with no code, we can think of it like this. Basically, with these no-code platforms, you can build an entire business, right? You can create the login, the sign up, you can connect payments, you have a database, you can do user management, you can create logic, you can have simple or complex flows, you can create notifications, etc. So an entire business. Now, if we want to tap into external data or external information, or create even more complex software, for example, we could tap into an existing AI model external to the platform itself, or actually build an AI model ourselves and link it back into our solution. We could also tap into different data sources. So if you want to bring in stock market information, if you wanted to bring in, let's say, weather information or any other information, you could actually tap into an API that would allow you to sort of bring in that data and have it sort of represented dynamically. So it would, as the weather changes, it's represented on the front end, and all that without necessarily having to build it yourself. And then tap into any service from Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And the best part of all of this is that you can actually build these connections all without coding as well. So not only can you build the entire solution, but you can attach it to other solutions external to your product and make the much more complex features as well, which makes it very exciting. A couple examples of this done. Nadeem scaled his startup from a couple $100,000 to 5 million in ARR, which is annual revenue. The awesome thing here is that he was non-technical, but also that he did not need investors or funding to be able to do that. So that's one of the huge benefits of leveraging no-code platforms. Now, another example would be Danny, she actually has a really inspiring story because she was kind of not enjoying her job anymore. She quit her corporate job, no plan B, ended up building Scribbly in 8 weeks with no-code tools, scaled that within 12 months to $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue. And so it's just a really great story because it just shows you like you can do really powerful things with these platforms. And now she's at about $30,000 in monthly recurring revenue. We also see people raising capital. We see people getting into Y Combinator with platforms fully built with no code. We see people growing to hundreds of millions. There's actually a platform that's a loan platform called Dividend Finance. They processed over $1 billion in loans with something built fully in no code. So it's incredible what can actually be done. When we talk about what can be built, here are some examples. So apps like Lyft, Uber, Tinder, WhatsApp, Instacart. So where features are kind of like geolocation, messaging, real-time tracking, among others. You can build marketplaces like Airbnb, Upwork, Amazon, Indiegogo. Features like creating profiles, creating house listing, also having kind of split payments. So if you as a platform want to take a fee but want to have other people paid as well, then that's pretty straightforward as well. Also, if you're looking to build social networks, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. So here features could be messaging, notifications, posting images, video sharing, etc. And of course, other platforms like Netflix, Salesforce, Pipedrive, Slack, Eventbrite, Zoom, where the features would be things like video calls, streaming, automation. So there's really a huge amount that can be built with no code. And almost every single platform that I've just mentioned has been already cloned leveraging no code tools, which is pretty impressive. And so you can see a whole other set of examples. If you go to wearenocode.com/showcase, you can see some more examples of no-code startups. There are actually many more than we have here, but that'll give you a good idea of what can be built. Of course, if you want to reach out and ask us in this presentation, we'd be happy to answer your question as well, which makes it really cool to be live. So we internally run a program called the NoCode Startup, and I'm going to give you a very short program outline. We'll be finished in just a moment, and we'll be answering all of your questions. So please type them all inside the chat right now. So what is it? It's an action-based program for early-stage, non-technical founders to build, launch, and monetize their startup without writing a single line of code. So action-based is because so many people are teaching fluff. We believe in teaching people hard skills and proven methodologies and really breaking it down step by step so people know how to follow it and have sort of all the resources to take action. Because action, my friends, is what is going to build your startup, not sort of overthinking things or creating business plans. So essentially, we provide everything that one would need to be able to be successful, the know-how, the community, coaching, discounts, perks. We have networking. I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these in a following slide, but everything that someone would need to actually go about building a product, and more specifically, a startup. Because building out a product, what people don't understand is that 90% of products actually end up being dead apps in the App Store. And that's a huge problem. And in fact, 43% of startups fail. The number one reason why startups fail is because there is no market need. And so the process of building a startup is not exactly just building a product. So, there's a lot more that you have to learn. That's why we combine sort of an accelerator or a startup accelerator where you're learning how to actually build a business, learning how to do marketing, learning how to do sales, all these other things, sort of figuring out the business model, the pricing, monetization strategies, as well as sort of building products, leveraging these tools. So we teach a curated list of no-code platforms within our program that we have selected after having built things for the past 7 years in no-code. So we have pretty vast experience within that field. And our main aim is really to empower non-technical founders within this program and to help them build their apps without being technologists or techies, if you'd like to call it that way, to help them acquire users and turn them into customers without having to be some kind of a salesman or trying to hard close people. That's not what most people are interested in doing. And oftentimes, if you're delivering enough value, you don't have to be an amazing salesman because people want to buy your product. So they just need to be aware it's around and have an explanation of what they're receiving. And of course, saving a huge amount of time and money. I can't tell you how many startup founders I saw apply for the program out of 400 applicants, and noticing that about 60 to 70% of them were spending between $20,000 and $150,000, and usually about 12 to 18 months. Very little sort of traction or revenue to show for it, or even progress. And so that's something that really frustrated me as a founder, was sort of this idea that the entire community of startup builders is talking about, like, hey, let's fundraise, let's create pitch decks. But over the past 15 years, having realized that entrepreneurs, sort of investors, have been going and investing in startups that are generating revenue, at least 3 to 6 months of revenue, essentially there's a big disconnect between early stage entrepreneurs and what's happening in the real world. And so, yeah, that's what we're here to solve. So people get everything within this program. The part that is within Teachable is the know-how. So we have a step-by-step curriculum that breaks down every sort of step. We have modules covering anything from building your MVP, building a smoke test, doing customer discovery, marketing, sales, fundraising, and essentially figuring out what that next step would be once you've built a business. Then we provide weekly coaching. So myself and Eddy directly are essentially once a week with about 20 to 30 builders. We get together and we essentially answer all the questions live, and are oftentimes doing demos and kind of helping people work through the roadblocks that they have. So that's super exciting. Then we have the networking. We've seen that we have all of our founders are so excited to interact with each other. We started creating speed networking events. It's sort of like chat roulette events with founders that happens once a month. We have $300,000 worth of perks and discounts. So the aim there is really, we have pretty much freebies and discounts for every no-code platform that we teach in the program, but 175 software services in general that we've negotiated discounts or freebies with, or credits, maybe $1,000 credits. And so that's just really awesome to save a bunch of money along the way. Our aim is really to help people save a bunch of money and learn the process, like this repeatable process of how to like launch companies quickly, test it in the market, monetize them, and then kind of figure out, are we going the growth path alone, like, and bootstrapping, which means like no raising capital, or do we need to raise capital? If we do, you need to understand what's going on in that realm. And some people choose to even get into kind of like Y Combinator, Techstars, some of these accelerators, and think that they need also a bit of cash, a bit more support too. That's awesome. And so the support, we actually have a video support channel, so a private channel with every single founder that joins, where we answer every single one of their questions with a video. So if you have a question and you're stuck on a specific feature, you are essentially sharing with us your private and viewable project. And we can go into that project, and when you're asking us a question, we can show you how to change things. We believe that essentially a video speaks louder than 1,000 words, and I'm sure a lot of people here probably agree with me. So this is the portal. When you join our program, you get access to all of the different things I spoke about. We also have a very special discount for people who are joining. So 25% off of our program. Usually it's $2,000, so less than 1 credit at a major university. And so we're doing $500 off for that. There is lifetime access to this, which is totally insane. No one will really do this because we also obviously provide the coaching and the video support, the community, all this other stuff. It's not just a course, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to emphasize. But with that said, we now want to answer all of your questions, because honestly, we're here to answer and to help and to add as much value today. So Eddy's going to come live. What's up, Eddy? You got disconnected for a bit,
I know,
so maybe we
and
can
I hope
take it from there.
now.
So yeah, if anyone has questions, I see some here coming into the.
Maybe we talk before we jump into all of the questions. Maybe we talk about some of the misconceptions or some of the mistakes non-technical founders make when they jump into no code. while this group is still very small, because no code overall is still a very young field and not many people know about this, there are still a lot of mistakes that we see non-technical founders make. So for instance, if you just start Googling no code, you will see thousands of products that claim to be a no code tool in some sense. I think Christian mentioned also there's over 1,200 different no-code tools and platforms around. And for many non-technical founders, this could be very overwhelming on essentially where to start. They might have an idea, they might have a use case in mind, but now there's 1,200 different tools that promise and claim all of the things, right? So it becomes really, really, really overwhelming, right? So in addition to that, we see also technical or even non-technical people having an idea and then starting off with the wrong platform. And so they identify a platform that promises something, they start building with it. 2 months later, they're like, oh, well, that feature that I wanted is kind of like not possible with the platform, right? So most overall, so what we usually do across all of our founders, we want to make sure that whatever they have in mind can be executed with the right platform, and then also share the strategic path on how they should build out products, right? For instance, like many non-technical founders start off and say, hey, I want to build a Facebook-like platform. So if we want to build a Facebook-like platform right now, we're talking about 1,000 features, because Facebook literally has more than 1,000 features, right? If you look at its totality, right? And something that is very, very crucial for founders, for any founder right in the beginning, is to essentially identify the problem that you're solving and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 features that are most helpful in solving that, right? And essentially realigning with the founder of like, hey, let's only focus on these 2, 3, 4 features, build those first, and then from there, everything else is just like a nice to have and is subject to validation, right? It's like, okay, this feature, let's see if your users are actually using it. Not, let's remove that feature, right? And I think while no code allows you to build everything, there's still a lot of dead paths that can lead technical and non-technical founders to. So in this case, we really focus on not helping you develop something or whatever you want, but essentially develop something in the right manner where you also get continuously feedback from your customers so you develop the right thing, right? And I think after, for instance, for me, it's like I've built, 40, 50 products overall. And after a while, you realize, well, not everything is worth building out and not every problem is worthwhile solving for, right? So you essentially start developing and start developing filters on like, okay, if it doesn't hit XYZ metrics, I will not even touch it, or will essentially move on with that idea, right? And I think this is in many instances where a lot of time is being wasted on founders, because they're just like spinning wheels on building something that is not necessarily needed, or essentially starting off with the wrong foot, get into a path, start building, and then 3 or 6 months later, no one wants it, and they build something that has too many bells and whistles.
Totally. I mean, some of the other mistakes that I see and I've seen in the applications that I was looking at was the first one is kind of like looking for a technical co-founder. If you don't have one already, looking for a technical co-founder, and I always kind of use this as an example, is kind of like going to a bar to get married. It's like, it's possible that you'll find the perfect person, but it's very unlikely. And so oftentimes what happens is that people end up going to a lot of networking events, doing a lot of effort to sort of do outreach and meet people, and then it's just very unlikely that you're going to meet someone who shares your mission and vision, who's willing to quit their high-paying job because they're developers, they're making 6 figures plus minimum, and also someone who is sort of willing to stick in for the long run. So a lot of people waste time doing that in a day and age where it's difficult to justify being an entrepreneur if you don't have some level of technical skills, because every opportunity requires a certain amount of technology. And so it's really important to understand that. Now, another mistake I see is like going to developers straight away. Like people have an idea and they straight away go to developers or to an agency, and these people will build anything that you want. They're hired by the hour, they're very expensive, and oftentimes you're gonna really build way too far. And at that point, what you're really trying to do more than actually building out the entire product, is to really understand what the market needs. And there are methodologies to be able to identify what that is, and then really to narrow down the feature set so that when you are spending money, whether it's hiring someone or even spending time learning how to build it yourself in NoCode, that you know precisely what people are willing to pay for, and more importantly, you're not just taking people's word for it. So that's a big mistake as well. Like when people do customer discovery, for those of you who are familiar with it, they kind of take people's word for it. They usually speak to their inner circle who kind of says, yeah, that sounds really exciting, it sounds like a great project, not necessarily the customer base that you're targeting. And so what happens is that you get a bunch of great feedback, you end up building an entire thing, and when you bring it to market, guess what? No one cares. Like no one wants it, and so that's another problem. It's like focusing too much on building the product and not enough on building the customer base in parallel. So the idea is we want to do both those things in parallel, and they essentially meet, and that's really the basis of the lean methodology, which allows people to build just more like quicker, and also just leveraging their resources in the most effective way. So yeah, those.
Yeah, and I think one point, just to quickly mention that before we jump into some of the questions that we have, is the idea of like looking for a technical co-founder, and something that we see emerge is essentially the idea of a non-technical founder that does the business side, but also does the product side, and is able to connect those two, because now the amount of time and effort it needs to essentially learn that is heavily reduced, right? So, and we in many instances talk about the founder of the future that is able to identify ideas and also put them into action and put them into something usable, like putting them out. So for instance, in Daniel's case, he's asking, can you do web scraping with NoCode? And the question is, yes, you totally can. And just to kind of like step back to elaborate a little bit more on this, is like with NoCode, you essentially have two aspects to it. You have essentially the product building. So here we're building Airbnb, here we're building, Facebook or a marketplace, whatever it is. And then on the other side, you have no code automation, right? Which allows you, for instance, the scraping of content. And then Daniel, to your next questions, and I'm going one by one. To essentially allow you to web scrape, but then also to automate, for instance, either being text message reminders, email notifications, and so on, right? And then especially on the email notifications, there we're going into marketing automation, right? So for instance, identifying what email platform do I need to use to make those email notifications work? Which, by the way, as Christian mentioned, we have $300,000 of discounts and credits. And guess what? We have, I think, 5 or 4 different email CRM platforms that we have credits for. I think one
Sendinblue, SendGrid. I mean, there's like at least 3 more. Yeah.
One of them, for instance, is like you get free access for a year, right? And you can have, I think, over 500,000 users. So it's awesome. So it's really, really awesome. So in short, yes, you can do automated text and automated email notifications with NoCode. And then also going to the next question, are you able to transmit data securely between 2 parties, a doctor and patients? Yes, that is totally possible. Based on the question, I feel there might be some HIPAA regulations going on here. So I would like to ask what type of data is being transmitted. Because when it comes to the topic of HIPAA and NoCode, it is some sort of a gray area. Most no-code platforms don't want to say they are HIPAA compliant, because that would essentially put them at risk and put them potentially to scrutiny. However, some of the individuals that we have in the program, one of the ways that they go about, building a HIPAA compliant company is, one, removing any sensitive data that they just don't need to collect. So in this case, they don't need to be HIPAA compliant. 2, they offload any sensitive data into an AWS server that is HIPAA compliant. So they're not storing any data on the app that is, patient data. They're essentially having it somewhere else to essentially mitigate all of that. And I think when it comes to apps or no code that is around HIPAA compliance and so on, you really want to dive a little bit deeper and understand what exactly is being considered HIPAA compliant, and then also like what are the areas I can essentially, or what are the areas that I need to double check to make sure that my app is fully HIPAA.
There's a bit of a workaround.
It can get very complex the second you start looking into the regulatory aspect of it. So you want to be really, really sure. And again, we can help you and guide you through all of it. But the more you know the regulatory aspect of it and know what data you want and don't want, the easier it is.
Yeah. Then the next question is, what kind of assistance can you provide if it gets to the point where raising funds makes sense? Well, if raising funds makes sense, which is basically when you're making revenue with your platform and that revenue is growing, and also you have sort of, that's something we can definitely orient you towards, like what might be the right, first of all, is fundraising, just understanding fundraising and what the kind of implications of that. Then also identifying like which is the best type of investor to raise capital from. A venture capital investor is going to be very different than an angel investor. It's going to be very, very different than if you do revenue-based financing. So there's all these also alternative mechanisms for fundraising. Oftentimes, if we go the VC path, there are implications that have to be understood. I have pretty good connections within accelerators and investors, so happy to introduce people, and I've done some introductions from students within our program to people who are ready to fundraise. We also get a bunch of people in our program who realize like, oh, I actually don't need to fundraise. Like I'm generating revenue. I don't really need anyone. I want to keep 100% of my company. And in that way, they just kind of choose the bootstrapping path. We highly encourage that, but at the same time, we understand, hey, everyone has a different path that they want to take, and we fully respect that. So yeah, happy to make introductions if it comes to that point. And essentially, the bottom line is really understanding the type of money that you're taking in can really affect things quite dramatically. Really, I've seen horror stories. I've seen people raise $30 million in VC funding and exit and make actually very little money after a 5-year sort of entrepreneurship journey. I've seen people make a lot of money bootstrapping. I've seen people. I mean, there's literally every story that you can imagine is possible. But
and I think if you are building a software startup where you don't have any hard cost, for instance, let's say a software startup versus a medical device company where you just need like a lot of money to invest into devices, then you definitely need funding. But nowadays, if you're building software with all of the tools that we have available, you just don't necessarily need funding because. And I think Christian mentioned that, right? When it comes to developing your app, in most cases, you're spending a couple $100s to fully finish your app. Let's say you're going fully extreme, all bells and whistles, all colors, everything, right? We're talking about $2,000-3,000 in cost of building your application. So in many instances, this seems that no funding is necessary for building a product for $2,000-3,000. In addition, if you're building it first, validate it first, and then seek funding at a later point, you just have more leverage and discussions when it comes to fundraising. Another question, which is
from Fo's side. By the way, thanks so much for the. She just sent a comment, or he just sent a comment. Christian, great job at Data 360 last month. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining the event. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So
there's a question now.
Yeah, this question in particular is very dear to my heart. Working on an engagement analytics platform, it features identity management tools that capture user reactions off device. Is there a no-code path to mapping emotions and eye tracking? In my previous life, I used to lead the data product and innovation initiative or practice at a larger agency, and I worked on eye tracking technology as well as identity management. So with all of that, here we're talking about heavy data usage and heavy data capturing mechanisms, right? When it comes to identity management tools and mapping all of the, let's say, for instance, an individual goes on a website. Here we need to capture the device ID, what they're doing on the browser, the screen size, and so on. And then also mapping it into a database that has millions of rows to essentially match them up with a different device and so on, and then attach eye tracking, all of that. Many instances, no code. In many instances here, we're talking about an enterprise solution that is in need of high data ingestion and also calculations. This is like a gigantic thing that we're building here, right? I would say no code overall is not the best path to approach here. You might want to use no code for all of your marketing pages to demonstrate how it works and so on. But when you're building this deep tech, because there's so much custom work involved, you want to essentially have that built out fully in custom code and essentially use that. You can develop applications that use eye tracking with no code. I think there are also a couple of open or free libraries out there when it comes to eye tracking. But here, again, it really, in something like that, there's a need of custom code. And then also before you essentially develop this, I would make sure that you are validated the heck out of this idea. And then also have maybe 1 or 2 customers that you can essentially start testing this technology already in while you also develop on.
Love it.
All
We have one
right.
from someone called NoCode. That's awesome. NoCode. Where are you coming from? Are you in the NoCode space? That's awesome. I love the
Yes, NoCode, of course.
yes, NoCode. Why not? Let's see. We have NoCode AI tool. Awesome. So yeah, essentially to answer your question, so what tips could you give in terms of planning, discovery, and defining MVP features before even getting into the NoCode tool itself? So essentially, there are a couple things. I mean, the first thing is kind of identifying which hypotheses are central to your idea. So the idea is, e aí, tudo bom? Eu falo português também. Yes, NoCode. That's so cool. It seems like he has a YouTube channel as well, which is very cool. So the first thing is kind of identifying which hypotheses are central. So for example, an example I always use is like with Airbnb. One of the key hypotheses behind the business model is that people are willing to rent out their house or their second home to random people. So if that hypothesis is proven right or wrong, will really determine the entire structure of the business. So really identifying which one of those hypotheses are important, and then ranking them from the highest risk to the lowest risk. And then we're going to really have to go out there and prove them right or wrong. That's going to always be essentially in the process of customer discovery and development. So that's when we jump into sort of discovery development, which is we're going to start talking to a very specific subset of the market. So identifying, okay, there are potentially, in my assumptions, there are 3 different types of markets or individuals who would be interested in the solution. Let's say single stay-at-home moms, veterans who are 60 to 70, just very specific segments, and then going out and having conversations that are very structured in where you're not talking at all about the product. You're really trying to understand the sort of opportunities or problems that these people are having within the process that they're trying to solve, and that it gives us a very clear indication of what people are interested in. And then we're going to jump into kind of testing the difference between what people say and what people actually do. So that's when we actually build out smoke tests, and we are really testing a product offering and seeing if people are willing to click to make an action that proves that they're willing to buy. So it could go from anything from like a fake buy button to some people, kind of only do the like, give me your email thing, which is good, but it still doesn't prove that people are willing to put down their money. So, and then after that, as you're having these conversations, you're also building relationships. You're having deeper conversations to go deeper into the sort of problem and solution fit. And that's where we start getting into, okay, we've now proven that people are interested in buying this product, or at least interacting with it. And we've also sort of have close contact with some of the people within our target market. Now we're really going to understand what feature sets we can build to essentially get them over the pay line, because that's what's going to define the difference between sort of just doing something for fun or a little side project or a charity to actually building it into a business. And so people often say like, oh, let's just like, I'm going to build a startup. I'm doing this like 8-week boot camp. Like no company is built in an 8-week boot camp. You'll get you can learn a bunch of stuff. That's awesome. But the reason why we made our program lifelong is because it allows us to continually answer questions. And 1 month, your question is going to be about the product. The next month, it's going to be acquisition. It might be right now, for example, we have a healthcare company that essentially built out their entire product they're generating revenue. They just onboarded their first 200 paying users, and they're going to be scaling up now to 2,000. And so the questions completely change, like, and they kind of always go back from product to go to market at the early phase of building. And sometimes it just, really validating is a huge and important phase.
Oh, sorry, Christian. I got a little
go ahead.
too eager here.
Jump in.
Right, and something that we heavily encourage is to spend time in the customer discovery phase and essentially talking to your customers and having them involved in the MVP stage, where you essentially say, oh, okay, this problem, how do you think this problem will be solved, right? Let's say you're logged into some magical portal. How do you think it should work, and so on? And essentially let that guide your MVP feature build out. Also, yes, NoCode, I just checked out your YouTube channel, and you have essentially a lot of awesome NoCode tutorials, which is great. And I think something that we see over and over again, right? Now with the rise in NoCode, you can build out anything you want, anything. We have the best tools out there that accomplish so many different things, right? It's great. However, building a business with no code and identifying a problem and using no code as tools, which they're built for, to essentially accommodate to that, is still something that remains hard, right? We see so many individuals in the no code space that are just like churning out one product after another without ever talking to a customer, which is great to essentially learn the skills of building and building and building. But when you're considering building a business and you essentially are serious about this, the whole narrative around what tools you use and how you approach it slightly changes, right? And this is essentially where we get a lot of where we get really excited about, because that's usually the hard thing. Building products was hard in the past. Now it's easier. Building businesses, identifying a customer need and delivering to that was hard in the past and remains hard today, despite no code and other things. And we are fortunate to essentially guide individuals through that process.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I always laugh because I talk with all my sort of on Twitter is where everyone's just like nerding out about no code. And the reality is that most coders and no coders are building products that no one ever uses. And so there's this much bigger problem that's happening behind it. And although people kind of are really focused around the like code, no code, what's the best approach and all that, like what we have realized is that that's kind of like that's a good concern to have. And in many instances, like there's just so many other aspects of building a company that people have to understand, and that actually entrepreneurship is not just a job, it's a career. So the more you learn the skills, the more you upskill and learn the processes, the more likely you are to essentially be able to build a company that is successful. But more importantly, it's also about reducing the amount of time that it takes to realize whether or not this is worth the next year and a half of your life, and usually a large chunk of your savings. And that's where I see a lot of people going wrong. It's like when you hit a wall, like the biggest problem is that it's difficult to keep up motivation and excitement about a product and a project. And so although no code is really sort of helping to democratize the building of products, there is still a long way to go before, and that was our main aim with Eddy, was to combine these two things so that we can give a direct route for people. And also, don't learn all of this stuff when you have the best idea of your life. Like, upskill so that when you have that and there's an opportunity in the market, and there always will be new opportunities. And in fact, COVID is constantly changing everything that we're doing, the way that we learn, buy, etc. So new opportunities are exploding at the moment. And so it's more about kind of setting yourself up with the skills so that when you do have a project that's worth building, then you already have all the skills to be able to execute on it. And that's just important, because I think that it's like people need to have a straight path. And right now, when they're spending $50,000 for an entrepreneurship MBA, unfortunately, they're learning the skills of yesterday. They're learning, how can I build a business plan? No serious investor ever looks at a business plan anymore. All these things where it's basically just creating more frustration, because people are learning what was essentially being taught for entrepreneurs 10, 15 years ago. Because guess what? In 2005, you can raise capital with just a great idea and a team. These days, forget about it. So it's more for us about helping more people believe in themselves and be able to increase their chances of success, because we've literally seen both sides of the entrepreneurship, the sort of investor side and the entrepreneurship side of it, but also building companies ourselves. And then it was only when I really took a step back and we're seeing all these applications coming in that I realized, oh my God, this is still happening, and it's worse than ever. And you ask most VCs, the reason why they're not actually able to answer your emails is because they get flooded by so many pitches, usually just a pitch deck, of people who are not at all close to being in a place where they can help back them. So anyway, I hope that was comprehensive.
Yeah, one other question that I really want to address is from Pockies, which is, I understand it's a big play using computer vision, blockchain, and AI on the edge or edge computing. So there's a thing in startup land that's called like a shiny object syndrome. Oh, there's blockchain. Oh, computer vision. Or Google just came out with a new algorithm that we can use as an API. Or edge computing is the next big thing according to Gartner and all of that. And these are all shiny objects, right? And there's some individuals that see that technology, jump into it and say, I love this technology. Now let's find a problem, right? And that's a totally wrong approach of essentially like, you have now a technology that is in the search of a problem. In many instances, you're trying to like identify problems with that are not necessarily problems, because you're bound by the limitations and the possibilities of that particular solution that you have, right? So ideally, use a totally different, identify the problem first. And then from there, the opportunities and possibilities on how to solve it become endless. However, if you have only a solution, in this case, you have a narrow window of problems that you can only address effectively. And then you also want to make sure that you're addressing it with the best technology, right? So you don't want to get the shiny object syndrome because blockchain is now the cool new hit. Or AI. AI has been a hit for many years. Computer vision, also all great. I mean, like, I used to read white papers on a daily basis and loved the computer vision stuff and all of that. However, it still depends on like, okay, what is the specific problem that we're trying to solve, and what out of the many technologies that are out there can solve this in the most effective and the best way possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's like really important to talk about as well, right? It's just, there's a lot of misconception. And what we always say when we do presentations is like, hey, now you have this information, like make sure that if you have a friend or someone in your family or who's interested in building something, or someone who's always been talking about all these ideas and never taking action, like there is a path for them now. I always say that this is going to replace coding for early stage entrepreneurship, because even if you're building an AI, even if your solution is something that's AI driven, like blockchain based, et cetera, there's the ability to actually build the demand behind that product offering before actually committing the money to build it is still the most effective way. And that doesn't require building out the entire platform to begin with. So as soon as I really understood, as soon as that hit home for me, it was just much easier to launch new products and to monetize them as well. Because, and then also for you, your main aim is to reduce the time and money investment and the risk of your startup, basically. Because that's what's the biggest risk at the moment, is that you end up spending all your money and time on something that's not worth it. So the quicker you can validate and build a customer's demand, the more that you are validating it and then justifying any investment. Listen, building startups will cost money. The question is how much money? And I've seen people spend $800,000 building a really sleek app, acquiring customers, and then realizing, oh, well, I didn't really think about my monetization strategy that well. And now that I'm hitting the market reality, this is actually a very specific example of someone who was who came to me, and now basically to be able to make money from this company that I spent $800,000 building, I'm going to need to rebuild the entire thing, because I kind of the business model was an afterthought. So these are some of the commonest mistakes that can lead people to startup failure, and that's one thing that just has to be addressed, because at the moment there's just And not to mention, by the way, that every single employee will also be required to learn a certain set of technical skills. Right now, everyone's used to kind of using the company's CRM or stuff like that. In the future, it's not going to be, you know, Excel and PowerPoint that you put on your curriculum to get the job. It's going to be showing products you've built, companies you've built, or showing the ability to automate processes. Also, something that we help a lot of our students with. We have a lot of different experiences. Difficult to kind of like cram it into one, but when you become an entrepreneur, you become a kind of a jack of all trades and learn how to essentially learn enough to take action within that part of the business, and then slowly how to replace yourself with that. So it's just very different than a specialist job that you might have. That's why like a lot of people think that they're well set up to succeed in entrepreneurship when they have a really an executive job, for example, but oftentimes end up wasting the most money because they have the most money to waste. So yeah.
It's true.
There you go. That was my long monologue. Sorry about that.
All good.
Cheers. I'm popping in just because we're coming up on time a little bit here. I do know there was one more question from Daniel Lee, and then I wanted to shoot just one question. Well, I have you here.
Yeah.
But Daniel was basically asking, just does this no code really allow, you know, can a no coder develop faster than a software developer?
Yeah, and I think here it depends, develop what faster, right? So just to give an example, you know, when it comes to Webflow, which is usually a designing tool, developing websites, 9 out of 10, a no-coder beats a traditional front-end engineer. Like, let's say here, and I see this all the time on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure, yes, no-code, you know, probably has done one of those where they say, okay, let's take a look at the newly designed apple.com website that does fancy animations and all of that and looks awesome. Let's try to replicate it with no code. Many instances, it takes them 1 to 3 hours to fully replicate an Apple design website with all of the animations. Now, you give the same exercise to a front-end engineer to essentially build it out in HTML and CSS and all of that. It will not take them 3 hours. It will take them, you know, a couple of days, a couple of weeks to essentially build that out, right? So when it comes to that, no code, as a no code individual or no code developer, you're much, much faster. When it comes to some more complex solutions, I would even argue with the tools that are available, many instances, maybe 8 out of 10 times you're faster in building that out. Because you just have, let's say this, you now have just better tools. Instead of using, you know, a rock to hammer a nail, now you have a hammer, which is a little bit nicer, which is you know, a little bit more efficient. You just have better tools overall. And with that said, I don't want to kind of like dunk on the traditional developers. Not at all. Not at all. Traditional developers, and especially if they're really, really good, they're really good at solving very complex problems when it comes to, you know, a specific custom feature. However, those problems in the development cycle are maybe 2% of all of the entire product, right? So why not focus on the 98% in no code and essentially outsource the 2, 3, 4, 5% that are really, really hard to the best developer that you can get out there. With that said, will no code replace mediocre developers? It seems like it.
Yeah. So I love this question because usually the way I talk about it is like, hey, it depends on what you're building. Like you can't build a virtual reality world or a blockchain infrastructure for the moment. Those are like two of the things that really are kind of no-nos. You can even build AI models in no code right now. So it's insane, and there's more and more platforms coming out that allow you to do more and more. So in many cases, no, it can't do every single thing that a software developer might be able to, but about 90 to 95%. And then usually in terms of how long it takes to build with no code, we're talking about if you took a development cycle that let's say is like 6 months, that's pretty much it's gonna be 6 weeks. And of course, there's also the learning curve. So that's a different story as well. If you come in and you're a total beginner, it'll probably take you a couple of weeks to learn some of the simpler no-code tools and a couple of months to learn the more complex ones, which is also a reason why we do lifetime as well.
I mean, we have some of our students that started in no-code. They essentially went really deep, and now open up their own agencies and essentially take work from others and developing their ideas, and they're like, hey, the profit margin is awesome because, people asking, like traditional developers asking 50K to develop this. I can develop that for 5K or 10K. Why not more? So we see those opportunities opening up in the marketplace.
That's so cool. So I've been through a roller coaster through this because I'm like already racking my brain for every app idea I've ever had. And then also like, I love how you're checking it. Like, no, you have to prove the case, make sure people want it. And I think this is kind of my question I wanted to sneak in. I think one of the most interesting things about this is if you have these tools, an individual can test a product all the way through actually having at least a version of it out there. And those AI APIs are one of the most interesting things to me. I appreciate that you said don't start with the API and go and look for a problem. But if you're someone who believes you have a problem and maybe you've tested that problem, is the course a good place for this, or do you have a recommendation for a source outside of the course to kind of see what's available as not just the no-code tools, but like the AI and those other things that you could draw into it in your effort to fix a problem?
Yeah, so we have a no-code toolkit that goes over some of the tools and then also highlights what's possible, as well as what platforms you can integrate with. Honestly, like, it's sometimes really hard because the possibilities are endless. It's like, yeah, you could literally build anything. Oh, as long as there's an API and you want to connect to that to do X, Y, and Z, it's like, yeah, you can do that all day long with many. But I think if for anyone that is interested, feel free to visit our website at WeAreNoCode.com. And then at the very top, you can essentially download a free toolkit that gives you $1,500 of credit, as well as highlights some of the no-code platforms, as well as some other services that you can essentially get started on today.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Jonah, like the other one that you had, which was all about like, okay, like what if I come in and I've already validated everything? Awesome, let's build. Like that's what we're here for, All we say is that like, hey, like there might, you might have just hopped into the common sense. Like building startups is counterintuitive. That's like a quote from the founder of Y Combinator. And essentially, it's very counterintuitive the way that you're going to approach it. And in many cases, I mean, honestly, if you're wasting all your time either on building a product that people don't care about or solving a problem that people don't care about, that's probably the place you'll lose the most time. But you can come in fresh with zero experience and start from the ground up. And we have people who have graduated from like UCLA's both accelerators and have come to us because they just can't build it. They're just like, I need to build this MVP. I need support doing it. Right now, there's a bunch of, if not, it's just racking the internet and watching endless YouTube videos and trying to figure out how this really helps me in my use case. So it's really in what we realize is right now the problem is not in the no-code technologies. It's in connecting these technologies to the people with the right advice at the right time. So that still remains the biggest problem. It's really it's the educational piece of it. And that's why we think that instead of building our own no-code builder, we've chosen to take a distance from all of them. We're not paid by any of them. And we just have basically curated the lists of the most powerful ones and help people actually accomplish what they want to do. No one comes into our program saying, oh, I wish I could build a feature. No, they want to build a business, or they want to solve a problem internally, or they want to automate something and take less time to do it. So we take more of a solutions approach to people's problems than what people on Twitter are doing, which is just like nerding out about features and stuff. And that's super fun. But oftentimes those aren't the end goals. So we try to bring it back to the end goals and always like, we basically created the program we wish we had about 12 to 15 years ago when we started building companies.
Pretty much.
It wasn't, yeah. And no-code didn't exist then.
And I love that. So you're not just offering the tools, you're offering also the business advice, the strategy, the test it, and the community to really build a business, not just build a product, right?
Yeah, it's we are in the business of building founders of the future that essentially have all aspects of it, and not just the NoCode part or the business part or just the marketing part. And essentially, and we also tell individuals, it's like, hey, it is a career that you're starting. It is not, just like a little thing. It's like, no, entrepreneurship is, longer than an 8-week boot camp. It is something that you have to acquire over time and do various tests. And essentially, if you have multiple ideas, awesome, let's go and test them all out. So that's kind of like our approach, right? So we're positioning ourselves between a startup accelerator and a product school, kind of like, as Christian showed, like this intersection, right? Where we take both of two worlds and essentially help founders to accomplish their goals and building businesses.
Exactly. So it's like part course, part coaching program. And that's, where we really know that there's just a lot of great stuff that comes from learning these things. Essentially, we talk about it like self-reliance. We're living in a world right now where there's a lot of unsure stuff happening and we don't know what's about to come. And so developing the skill of self-reliance is a skill that you can use for the rest of your life. So that's like kind of what we encourage. It's like, hey, guess what? Like, AI and automation probably going to replace a bunch of jobs. And we're kind of transitioning from being these people who essentially were doing these individual tasks and trying to be as good as, let's try to do as many tasks as we can. And now it's like, this is a waste of our time. Like, we need to become masters of tools that allow us to essentially, become more productive at work and be more effective in the way we approach startups too.
Yeah, well, and have more time to focus on the quality of the business, not the product, right? I love that. Yeah, I love that approach. I hate to cut it short here, but we are coming up on time. To everyone watching, please hop in the comments. You've been asking awesome questions. Thank Christian and Eddy, and formally thank you as well for your time.
Thank you.
I know I'm like jumping at the bit already to start researching more of the things you can do with NoCode. If you all like this video and like learning new things, please like and subscribe to the Discover channel. Also, just to restate one more time, the link to their course is available in the comments. It'll be emailed to you in the replay as well. And for a week, they're giving 25% off, which for basically, it sounds like a full-scale like business building program. Seems pretty fair to me.
It's like an entrepreneurship in essentially... it's an MBA in entrepreneurship and NoCode kind of thing.
Right. I love it. Before we sign off here, Christian, Eddy, do you have any last little words of wisdom for people getting started on this journey?
Yeah. I think for many, just general advice. I mean, like, we work with so many entrepreneurs on a daily basis that have hundreds of ideas on no ideas. And I think the only advice is just get started. Regardless of how good, how bad your ideas, just get started. Get
break
the
things
ball rolling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we do internally all the time. We release before things are totally polished. We it's basically we're such perfectionists as entrepreneurs, and so we want everything to be 100% perfect because we believe it is such a central part to our identity. I fail doing something, I'm a failure, and we have to disconnect those things to give ourselves the freedom to grow as individuals, as entrepreneurs. My last piece of advice is check out our YouTube channel. We put out a bunch of content around entrepreneurship. Yes, we talk about NoCode on a higher level, but more about entrepreneurship. Also, we have free resources on our website, interviews of me with some of my investor friends, with some no-coders, with entrepreneurs who have built awesome companies. We have a free toolkit that Eddy mentioned with an outline of NoCode and a bunch of discounts as well. We have a workshop where we kind of go a little bit deeper into the program. I mean, there's so much that you can take action with right now that it really it doesn't make sense not to get started. So I would give the same advice as Eddy. Just get started. Just don't be scared. Just get started.
All right, I love that. Gotta carry that energy through the day. Well, thank you so much, Christian. Thank you so much, Eddy, and thank you everyone who's been watching and asking questions. And we'll see you all next time. Have a wonderful day, gentlemen.
Thanks so much, Jonah.
Cheers.